I'm JJ Perez from Inside Runner Sports. That is Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. UTSA football game wrap up post. Man, what has it been? 3 weeks since we've done our last
Yeah.
one. Just been a real busy time of the year for me. My schedule's been pretty slammed, and shout out Greg. He wanted to do one for this last game, so here we are, Greg. Welcome
Well,
back.
so I went and got a haircut, and I was like, I got to get on video as soon
Same.
as
I
possible.
got one too. Same.
So see, we
Yeah.
just had to time it up right. But yeah, I think this was a good game to do it. There's a lot to talk about.
Yep, UTSA comes out with a huge, massive 58-24 win over East Carolina. Greg, the Roadrunners are bowl eligible for a sixth straight season under Jeff Traylor. But my biggest takeaway, and I think this is where I want to start, I think this may have been the best a UTSA football team has played under Jeff Traylor, just on how they looked. Now that fourth quarter was kind of, reserves were in or whatnot, but man, that game was done early in the third quarter against, what seemed to be a formidable East Carolina team.
Yeah, there have been some games where they blew opponents out, but not a team that was expected to contend for a conference championship and came into the matchup favored and had put together a really solid season and just seemed like a team that wasn't going to have a letdown like that. You know, East Carolina, they've just been so consistent, especially when you look at what they've done on offense and defense. It's not like it's just been one side of the ball or the other. So you expected that UTSA was going to have to play their best just to have this be competitive and for them to be able to put this game away as quickly as they did. You know, to your point, I pulled up the some of the stats from this game, you know, like your success rates and all that stuff, and it's just nonsense. Like, because you know, the first half matters. If you can find one that splits it that way, then that's useful. But the box score is not going to tell the full story of how much in control of this game UTSA was to score, you know, seemingly at will through the first stretch. I think it was like four of the first five drives were touchdowns, and nine of the first 10 were points, something like that. And then on defense, East Carolina really had a hard time getting anything going, and it you start to talk about the Alamo Dome magic part of it a little bit. But before we get too far off your original question, yeah, we were looking through the like history. There's in
Yeah.
the media guide, there's a listing of every game that's been played because it's really not such a long. They can fit it all on one page still, and I just couldn't see anything that jumped off that said that was a better overall showing or performance than this. And you know, we asked Jeff Traylor about it this morning and also after the game, and he couldn't immediately come to mind with anything. So I think that's pretty telling too. Yeah, I think there's a really good case for it.
Yeah, I think just off the top, I think South Florida last year maybe enters that conversation. Memphis a few years ago, right? I don't know. I just don't think. Let's get into the game because you mentioned it. The way the offense started, I mean, it was. Let's just start there with the offense. And I don't like to call them trick or gadget plays. I guess gadget plays isn't disrespectful, but in the past, they haven't hit on those. And over the last 2 or 3 weeks, they're hitting most of them, and it's crazy. And just the way the offense has been able to turn things around, I guess, from the first half of the season. A strong performance. Owen McCown threw 5 touchdowns. They were down their starting running back, wide receiver, one of their starting tight ends, and they never missed a beat offensively.
Yeah, so we've done these before after losses where, you know, I see just guys not executing plays or just it seems like things aren't all the way clicking and I'm on Twitter or whatever and people are coming after the offensive coordinator and I'm just like I hadn't thought of it that way. But to me, this was an offensive coordinator game if ever there was one because I just thought everything Justin Burke dialed up worked. Like there's the obvious stuff like that the gadgets that you mentioned and if you want to talk about the fake kneel down and stuff like
Yeah,
that, but you know, they hit the flea flicker off the reverse on the first drive that kind of sparked him. But I'm thinking even more just, you know, how many times did they call a screenplay and it was just wide
right.
open? They understood where the pressure was going to come from on this defense, and they were just a step ahead of everything East Carolina wanted to do. So I just thought that was a remarkably well, you know, thought out game plan and then put into execution, pressing the right buttons at the right time where, you know, the guys made plays, but David Amador on the 45-yard touchdown in the middle screen didn't have to do a ton. You know, it was
Right.
just they called the right play at the right time and it was wide open and they had the same kind of success on some screen plays out to the side. And, you know, Marion Peterson scored on that
Yeah.
sprint drop play, which,
Yeah.
you know,
That was super
they've run it
crazy.
before, but they haven't
Right.
run it a ton.
Right.
You know, I mean, the first touchdown of the game, they line up under center, which, you know, already that's got to have East Carolina thinking because what do they want line up under center like five times in a season? And it's so it's just
Right.
like they pulled all these different tricks out. the longest run of the game was out of a two back set. They run
Yeah.
that maybe like 5% of the time or less. So it's just, I thought they were just so, I imagine it takes a lot of work during the week to rep that many different things that you haven't done a lot and to have it be sharp come game day. So that's where, as much as people like to throw shade at the coordinator when things aren't going well, I thought this was a game where, he deserved as much credit as the guys on the field, honestly, which is rare.
Yeah, I think three of those first half touchdowns, you mentioned Amador, the AJ Wilson catch, the Houston Thomas, as wide open as can be. Like as they had him fooled, they had the play call, and I agree. I think Justin Burke was the CBS Sports Coordinator of the Week for a
Yeah.
third time this
Oh,
year.
really? Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. So a heck of a game. What about Owen? Never in his I guess one time in high school he said he threw five touchdowns, but pretty strong performance. Not his most accurate game, not his biggest yardage game, but very 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 good, very complimentary with the run game.
Well, that's another example where we've had plenty of games this year where whether it's on social media or what you see in the comments after, people are coming after Owen and very critical of his performance. And we were on here, whether it was because they had alluded to stuff or even before it started to become more obvious that he was playing hurt. It just seemed like he wasn't the same guy, and there was no great explanation for it. And now we're seeing the player we thought we would see all year, where it was this game and the game against Tulane, where the
Yeah.
games where he really looked sharp. But even compared to the Tulane game, this was the first time where we saw him as a runner look as comfortable as he looked in this game and have a level of mobility that had been missing. And so whether it's, there's a groin or a hip and a shoulder and a whatever else, that it seemed like he is getting through all of that, or at least, if nothing else, learning how to manage it better, where he looks like the player we expected to see. And that just totally changes this offense.
Yep, for sure. Another strong performance by Will Henderson, getting his first career start with Robert Henry sidelined with injury. Greg, back-to-back 100-yard games from Will Henderson. Hard, strong rushes too. I think that's the thing I'm most surprised. 19 carries. I didn't think they could hand it to him 19 times and he still be effective, but he's doing it every week.
Yeah, he had 19 carries against Charlotte too, and I asked him after the game during the week actually, how did you hold up to that physically and what is that like? Just because he's a guy who comes in with a pretty slight frame relative to what you would consider a workhorse back, and he said he was pretty sore the next day and he took an Epsom salt bath and then he was good to go by practice. And so I guess when you don't have that career mileage on you,
Yeah,
and when you're maybe just wired a little bit differently too, he seems like he's able to hold up to that because we were impressed even from go all the way back to the Texas A&M game. I don't know what
yeah,
his numbers were there. They weren't great, but it was like, wow, he really like drives into the pile in a way
yeah,
that you don't expect for somebody with his skill set and build. And so it's not surprising that against the G5 opponents that you see the same kind of thing and that he does not shy away from contact and not going to run anybody over, but he's going to get a couple extra yards here or there and he's going to be able to run inside with effectiveness. And then obviously they have figured out which was, it's not rocket science, but when you have a guy who's that fast, if you're going to do some of these deception plays, whether it's the tush push fake that we saw last week or the QB kneel fake that we saw this week, he's a guy that can get to the edge a step quicker than a lot of other guys while the defense is still saying, wait, where's the ball? And it's just been an effective strategy for them. So he's proven that he can be. Now we saw early in the year where they kind of rode Robert Henry pretty hard
yeah.
and
Right.
he was not the same after those first few games. So I think they probably have to be a little bit careful with how they manage this workload, but we're at the end of the season now. So
Yeah.
he's really just got to get through Army. And
Yep.
that's like not even knowing what Robert Henry's status is going to be for that game. He's really just got to get through Army and then he's got a little rest for the bowl game.
Yeah, let's just touch on Robert, right? There was, I guess, an injury situation. He was on the injury report. I don't know if we have any clarity on that at this point. I know there was a lot of chatter out there last week about, how he was seemingly benched after, his not minus 25 or 30-yard run at Charlotte. I guess what do we know? What do we think about Robert? I mean, I think it's pretty clear there's an injury situation there.
Yeah, it's an injury situation because it's on the injury report. Like that part's pretty cut and dried, but there is I don't think it's wrong for anybody to assume that there's more layers to it because, first of all, after the game, Jeff said it was a coach's decision, and I asked him to elaborate, and he didn't. He just said it was a coach's decision, and then he made a point the next day during the Monday roundtable there of sort of re-emphasizing that Robert was going to be the starter and that whatever had gone wrong in that game was kind of behind them, and so I think it's fair for anybody to assume that there's more to it than just he got banged up and so he wasn't playing, but certainly that's part of it too. It is interesting. We saw him warm up in the game, and usually what they do in that like final 11 on 11 session before they break the huddle and they go into the locker room again to get ready for pregame, usually that's pretty telling of who's going to start and what that's going to look like. And he was the guy in those sets. So I was a little bit surprised when he didn't take the field at all during the game. So it must have been just an injury thing and a smokescreen at that point. But it's anybody's guess what that looks
Yeah.
like, I think, for the finale here.
Officially listed as questionable last week, and my guess is we see that questionable again this week, Greg. I think just to wrap up on the offense, I want to talk about the tight ends and the wide receivers, specifically more about the tight ends. Dan Dishman was sidelined with an injury, and but we saw an uptick in tight end usage. I think we've seen an uptick in tight end usage the last 2 or 3 games since we did one of these wrap ups. Where's that coming from?
Yeah, well, I think it's sort of what we thought we would see the whole year, right? I think it was sort of an under the radar disappointment through the first 7 or 8 games, just how little those guys had been involved when you talked about their versatility and how often UTSA wants to play two tight ends when they have the personnel to do it, and just that it hadn't translated into targets for guys who are, in a lot of ways, receivers first. Like you think of Houston Thomas and a Patrick Overmeyer are guys who they have a lot of acumen as receivers more than you would think of them as kind of inline blockers. And so for the bottom line statistics to not be there in a bigger way was a little bit surprising. So I think that it's sort of just a kind of a return to form. But can you point to anything that you think has led to it?
Jeff said today they're kind of more involved in the gadget plays, right? Maybe some of that's opened up some of it. Seem like they're just targeting Houston Thomas a lot more, right? He's getting a lot of more of the lion's share opportunity, and with Dishman down, it seems like Overmeyer's going to be more of a pass catching threat than he has been, and of course they're using him a lot on that tush push play. So,
I
um,
think maybe part of it too is when Owen is more mobile, he probably gets deeper into his progressions, and those guys are a lot of
yeah,
times the safety valve options. So I was thinking of, I don't remember the scenario, but it was a couple weeks ago. And Jeff Trailers talked about this play a couple times where the tight end in the flat was like the fifth
yeah,
read, and Owen got all the way through the progression and got to that guy where if he's not healthy and not mobile and scared to take hits because he doesn't want to get more severely injured, then you might not get that far in the progression. And that's some of the stuff we
right.
saw earlier in the year. So I think that there's probably a lot of different elements to it, but it does seem like that just as the offense clicks, they click too.
Before we jump to the defense, I do want to talk about the play of the offensive line because I do think they won the battle of the trenches there against what seemed like was going to be a pretty physical defensive line, and they did so kind of banged up in this game. They saw some guys go down with injury. I don't think we know who's going to be out or who's expected to come back. It looked like there were a few serious injuries there. Greg, you want to run down what we saw and who went down?
Yeah, so Kamar Missouri goes out at left tackle, and Jonah Miller comes in. And Jonah Miller's really interesting because he was at one point highly recruited, ended up, I think it was at Oregon, and had like a parasite or something where he lost a lot of weight. He had to go to JUCO and kind of start rebuilding there and continue that sort of rebuilding physically at UTSA. And so we didn't see him play last year. And then this year, he was even limited because he's still playing with the cast on his left hand, but he had an injury of some type. I think it was like during preseason camp. So he's been sort of limited in what he can do. And I think just out of necessity, he was kind of the next guy up
Yeah,
at that position. And that's not to say that he doesn't deserve it. He seemed like he held his own pretty well, but that's just an interesting guy who's still kind of a project, I think, and could still reach a higher level as he gets
right.
more reps. And, being able to play with two hands would probably help too. Although I doubt he's going to get any holding penalties this way. So at least you got that going for you. But then at right guard, Darrell Jones went
Yep.
out.
Big
And
Rail.
that was, I mean, I don't, Davion Hurth comes off the bench.
Yep.
And we've seen him line up at fullback in some random
Right.
plays earlier in the season. And he was not on the depth chart.
Yeah.
And you have a guy over there in Corey Godinet who I don't know what his sort of health perspective or fitness level is to play a huge workload, but that's a guy you would expect would be next up just because he's been an all conference level guy in the past. And instead it's this 255-pound guard, which you just don't see that. But he
Yeah.
he really held his own and did well. I was hoping to learn more about that this morning. Jeff didn't want to talk about him too
No,
much.
he
I
didn't
don't
want to give it up. Yeah.
I don't know if he's hurt and he's just not going to play, or if he thinks every last guy who plays seven snaps is going to get poached in the portal, so we don't get to hear as much as we should. But maybe at some point we can learn the story there because I know he came out of high school really light,
Yeah.
and apparently he did actually get up to 295 last year. That's what they had him listed out on the roster, and I thought they were just being nice to him. But if he actually did get up that high and then lose all the weight again, it's just a really interesting study for a guy who still has a lot of years left in the program if he wants to take them. So that's worth keeping an eye on. But
Yep.
again, I don't even know if he's going to play because he ended up going out too.
Right.
And I can't even. It was
Beach.
that one. That was
Yeah.
when I think either Corey Godenek came in or we saw
Yeah.
some Demetrius Allen. But that was
Yep.
a case where, yeah, they're just getting deeper and deeper in that depth chart. But it's just funny because those are two guys who were considered
All
acceptable
conference.
starters
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
couple years ago. Yeah, so that's not. It's not maybe not as dire as it might have been where we've talked about some O-line shuffles in the past.
Yep. Lots of shuffling there where in the past it would have been, dire situation and they're just plugging and playing now. So I think that's a good sign from that depth. Greg, we've gone too long to not talk about the defensive effort. Dominant. I think East Carolina did not play their best game, but I think UTSA had a lot to do with it. It seemed like the Pirates were rattled by the little crowd noise that UTSA did have. I mean, it gets loud in there with 16, 18,000. There were a few false starts there. Solid performance. Three turnovers. Basically just shut them down.
Yeah, and that group has had a lot of ups and downs, which we knew coming in would be probably the case just because there was so much newness there. And it's just been really impressive to see. It's not like it's been a straight line that they've gotten better week after week. There's still
Right.
been some where it felt like they struggled, but there's been apparently a real emphasis on some physicality in practice after some of these games, like South Florida, particularly in North Texas, stick out where the tackling effort was just really,
Yep.
really bad, and they were very critical of themselves, and Jeff Traylor was critical of them too. And we're seeing now that there's not as many missed tackles. I don't know what we should ask tomorrow what the count was in this game because I
Yeah.
know against Charlotte they said it was just four. And against South Florida and North Texas, it was like in the 20s or 30s. Like it was some
Yep.
astronomical number. So I think that they're certainly showing the benefits of that. And again, I don't know. Jeff doesn't like to talk about this either. I don't know how much different it is from a physicality perspective. He says they're not like fully tackling to the ground, but Ty and Milton made it sound like last week that they really are, putting some pretty good hits on those scout team guys. So I don't know exactly what that looks like and how much that really does translate to the field, but you can see just a difference in the level of and it's one thing to do it against Charlotte, but ECU is a good team, and to do it against those guys tells you that there's something that they're doing on the back end there that's working.
I wouldn't call it playing chippy because that's borderline like dirty or getting a penalty, but you're right. Just the physical nature of like they went right up to that line of chippiness, and you could tell it had an impact on the way East Carolina played offense.
Yeah, I just don't. I think they aren't afraid to engage in some of that. Like
Yeah,
we've seen that in the past, but they've done it in this game in particular in a way where it was not going to lead to any penalties or create any negative situations. It was funny though. I don't know if I was saying this to you or if I was saying this to Javi in the press box, but they were so fired up. It's like KK Meyer made this tackle on like third down, and it was like 4th and 2 from the plus 40. And it's like the
yeah,
most obvious that they're going to line up and go for it. But they
yeah,
were so busy, fired up, celebrating. He was 30 yards offside,
yeah.
and
They
Ahmad
took off
Chatman came
timeout.
over to celebrate with them. They had to waste
Yeah,
the time out on this play. So there was just that you can kind of transition that into talking about the home field thing if you want. But there's just a level of energy and intensity that they come out with in these games in the Alamo Dome that makes a difference.
yeah. Fired up there on that play and a couple of others. I mean, they were really good on third down, great on fourth down. Let's talk about the Alamo Dome, the home, the what is it, Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, the up and down, the disparity between the road performances and the home performances. Greg, 25 and 0 in league games in the Alamo Dome.
Yep, that's correct.
How is that explainable?
Yeah, and then there's four of them, including two this year, that have been as kind of outright underdogs, which is, surprising that they'd ever be an underdog in that building at this point. But it's like an impossible line to make, I guess. I don't know what I would have done last week if I was in Vegas and had to make that kind of call because it's just sort of defies whatever you think you know about both teams that they play at such a higher level. And again, like I haven't watched a ton of East Carolina this year, but the team that took the field in the Alamo Dome was not a great
Yeah,
team. They
that,
didn't play very well. And I don't know if it was just the environment or if something about playing indoors rattles them, but
mhm.
the quarterback Hauser, who's had a great season and seems to be making a huge difference for them, missed a lot of throws that were
Yeah,
there for him to make. And
two
I,
touchdowns if I counted them right.
it's either it's a sightlines thing or it's just
Yeah,
an atmosphere thing or it's an air conditioning thing. I don't know what it is, but like nobody else plays indoors, so they're just kind of not used to it. And the way the sound bounces around,
yeah,
maybe it even impacts just their communication. I don't know. It would be maybe it'll be an off-season project to see if anybody who's played there in recent years will talk about why it's been so difficult. But it sort of does defy explanation at this point.
yeah. It's wild. The Roadrunners continue to row at home, Greg. They continue this streak of bowl eligibility, something that's not, it's not competing for the championship. Obviously, they were out of the hunt a few weeks ago, but it's still a significant and important, milestone for this. It wasn't that long ago where UTSA was eligible for a bowl and got passed over, right? Now to become in that mix, 6 straight years, it's pretty significant, I think, and I think it's something that, it's not the best thing that you wanted out of this season, but it's something pretty good.
It's just funny. I should go back and watch the video we did after the game at Temple because we said, this could be just like last year where they lose a couple games earlier that people don't want them to lose, and then they get it together and they finish, with 7 or 8 wins, which is still in play here. And then suddenly everybody thinks they had an okay season. The only thing that's probably different is I actually don't think that everybody's okay with that. I think like they gave them that grace period last year, and now the bar is raised where having a 7 or 8 win season is not received in the same way, and people might still want to see something shaken up over the offseason, which is a whole other conversation. And I kind of doubt that anything significant will happen in that way, just based on the level that we've seen this team reach down the stretch here. But yeah, it's just it's something that we talked about when they moved leagues a couple years ago and nobody wanted
Yeah,
to hear it. But it's just going to be harder to sustain
yeah,
the level of success that they had in Conference USA because you're up against much better teams every single week, especially this year
yeah,
with like who would have thought that you'd be an underdog at home against East Carolina? And obviously the game played out probably about how you would have expected 5 months ago. But the point being, it was a lot harder test than you thought. And the
yeah,
same goes for going to Temple and South Florida, and obviously was at such a higher level than anybody expected them to be at. And North Texas, like who would have put them in the playoff
yeah.
picture the way things have gone since then. So generally speaking, it just seems like UTSA can hope that every year is not like this year, that
Right,
whether it's coaching changes or guys getting into the transfer portal, that these other programs aren't consistently at this high of a level. And maybe UTSA, following the formula they followed, can put out a team that's just as good as this year. And that team's good enough to contend for a title in a different kind of season, in a different landscape, which is reasonable, but
yeah,
it's just going to be harder. So yeah, I understand that people want better than this, but I do think there's no shame in the season that they've put together. Of course, how they finish matters. If
right,
you're 6-7 because you lost to Army and you lost a bowl game and you lost your Alamo Dome win streak, that's one thing. And if you're 8-5, that's a whole other thing.
right. And maybe this is a question to ask, after next week, because let's face it, Army is probably historically one of the toughest matchups UTSA has faced, both at home and on the road. And, they're either looking at a 7-5 regular season or a 6-6 regular season. And that seems like under Jeff Traylor, that's going to be the floor of what the real expectations are.
Yeah. You know what? And if you want to talk about the Army matchup in particular, all of these games have been so different. It's
Yes.
funny. I looked at them and I wrote like a 2 sentence recap last night for each one. But you go back to the game against you go back to the game in 2020. That was the game where Lowell Narcisse got
Yep.
injured, and that kind of changed everything. And Army did what Army does. That they ran the ball and they controlled the clock in that game. But then what about the next time they played them in 22 was the game at West Point that
Yep.
UTSA won, and they gave up 300 passing yards to
Yep.
Army, which is like you just like they hit all these big plays through the air, and it was such a weird scenario. But on offense, they kept up and ended up winning in overtime. And then the last two games, but between the last two games, this is almost unbelievable. Army is 10 of 11 on fourth down between the last
Crazy.
two games, and
Yeah.
that's just that was the difference certainly in the game. in 23 where they went 6 for 6. And
Yeah.
Jeff already mentioned that in post game after ECU as he was looking ahead that that's certainly something that stuck with him, and rightfully so. And that's the game where Eddie Lee Marburger started
Yep.
because
Yep.
Frank Harris was hurt, and so that was kind of a weird scenario too. It's not like it was his fault that they lost. He played really well, but it was just such an unusual circumstance for that to be a game where UTSA loses in the Alamo Dome. For one of the rare times that that's ever happened.
Yep.
Then last year,
The cold game.
yeah, last year it was
Yeah.
4 for 5 on fourth down, and they
Yeah.
really dominated time of possession, and they played Army football. And people, I think a lot of people, yourself included, have talked a lot about the UTSA's decision to go for it on 4th and 1 from their own
Yep.
16 with a 1 point lead on the first play of the fourth quarter. And I'm still super confident that statistically it's the right decision. I know a lot of people disagree, but that did become a huge factor in them ultimately losing that game. So, yeah, it's just been a really fascinating series. And the thing that you expect if a team struggles with Army is that you're going to look back at the results and see that Army ran all over them, and that just hasn't been that way. I mean,
Yeah.
they've compiled some pretty good rushing games, but in terms of like yards per carry, UTSA has done really well against those guys, and so they've sort of forced them to play left-handed in a lot of these matchups, and they've just found a way to get it done anyway, just through whether it's like this discipline. I think, and once again, they're the least penalized team in the country
Yeah.
this year, something like that, and so it's just little stuff like that where they kind of win on the margins, and it's made a difference. If the Alamo Dome rattles people, why wouldn't the most disciplined
Yep.
team be
Yep.
the one that has the most success in the Alamo Dome? So I guess it like makes sense. Or if it's your passing game is weird because you're indoors, the team that never passes might do pretty well. I
Yeah.
mean, there's like anecdotally you can come up with reasons why that would make sense, but it's really hard to put your finger on.
Roadrunners are a 7 point favorite this week at Army, I think is what I saw. So we'll see. I think it's gonna come down to the execution, right? I mean, can the offense keep UTSA's offense keep the ball away from Army's offense? I think sometimes the best defense is a good offense, and will UTSA's defense continue to be disciplined? I think we've seen the penalties decrease a ton the last few weeks, right? Can they continue that trend? I think those are some of the keys this week, Greg.
Well, the other insane stat that we haven't talked about much is I think I'm trying to double check it right now. I think this was the what is it, sixth straight game that's been decided by 20 or more points one way or the other.
Yeah, it's wild.
Whereas we spent 4 seasons of
4 years,
Jeff Traylor where I couldn't write a word until the game was
the
over because
very
we had
end.
no idea what was going to happen. And now all my stories are done with 8 minutes to play. So I just don't know. Like, I think we're going to see a little bit more of a return to the close games this week because of Army's play style. They shorten the game with the way they keep the ball on the ground and control the clock. So if anything, I would expect that streak will be in. It's probably pretty hard to beat Army by 20 or more points or to lose to Army by 20 or more points. So that's the one thing that I think will be a little bit different. And we'll have to see if the Roadrunners are still as comfortable in those situations as they've looked in the past without having done it in a while.
Greg, I think we touched on everything in the game. Do you know what bowl game we're gonna go to?
No, I have not thought about that even a little bit. You want
Wow.
to go to Frisco though, right? You're excited to
Yeah,
go back to
run it
Frisco.
back. Yeah, run it back. I don't think it matters if they win or they lose where they're gonna go. I think historically we've seen that it's just wherever ESPN wants to put the Roadrunners, they'll put them there. So,
Yeah, last year was a good example of even whatever you think you get might not be what it is because
right.
Coastal Carolina like barely fielded a team,
Yeah.
So it's like whoever you get matched up against, what do they look like when game day actually arrives, and what does UTSA look like when the game actually arrives? I know they've been good about dodging that, but you never know what could be the year that a bunch of important guys jump in the portal and it becomes a whole other situation. So I think certainly the fact that they got to actually go somewhere last year means I doubt internally they'll push back against in-state game. I
Yeah.
think that was kind of like the year they went to Orlando. It felt like if they were in state again, it was just going to be so lame and nobody would want to do it. And so I think whatever pull they have, they kind of leveraged to try to get something more interesting. But this year, I think if they get, if they get a boring bowl game, I think they'll probably take it. I don't think that's a
Yep.
big.
Yep. You gotta count your blessings, I guess. Be thankful just to be in that conversation because the way the season started, hey, listen, it certainly could have gone the other way, right? I think we're a few plays away from seeing, the opposite of what we've saw the last month of the season. And I think in the big picture, if things continue to go the way they've gone the last few games, I think it's going to be a pretty good season, Greg. When you look back on it, I know there's still a few games left to play, but I think when, the history books look back at this season, it's going to be like, hey, this was not the best of seasons, but it still turned out pretty good. And I think that's the direction this thing is headed.
Well, yeah, and it's also interesting. I was looking at, we were trying to figure out who we want to interview this week.
Yeah.
And, the last home game, bowl eligibility is already locked up. We can do the senior thing. I was down to have some of those conversations about guys reflecting on their career or whatever. And it's just like all these guys are either hurt or they don't play that much to begin with. Like,
Yeah.
I think when we actually start looking at who the returning starters are next year and what that can look like, and obviously you have to get through portal season first, but I don't know, there's probably going to be a lot of room for optimism around next year's team. If you get the Owen McCown that we saw
Yeah.
Saturday for a whole season, then this could be a team that people are pretty excited about what they could accomplish. But that's a conversation for another day once you know what the roster looks like a little bit better.
Right. And I do think it's hard to, and I think we're both on the same page about Jeff Traylor's comments about resources and needing more and roster management and all that stuff. What I was most surprised this year was how much improvement other programs have made, right? Like we don't know what the real numbers are, what the budgets are, what other programs are actually pumping into their football programs, but you can see on the field that it's like a bigger disparity. I don't know if Memphis keeps getting more better roster. Memphis, South Florida, Tulane. I mean, those are all surprises in my book. East Carolina, North Texas. I mean, North Texas certainly hit on their running back and quarterback, right? So who knows what next season holds as far as improvement of rosters. So it's one thing for UTSA to retain what they have and then try to increase their production and get better.
Yeah, I don't know. I think some of the groups that we saw on the field this season have to be pretty close to their ceiling.
Yeah,
Um, and especially, I think the coaching thing you can't understate. Like when you mentioned Memphis and North Texas and South Florida, it is unclear how many of those coaches will still be there
right.
next year
Yeah,
and how many of them will have different jobs given just how wide the openings are this time. And
yeah,
who knows? I don't think Jeff Traylor's getting back in those conversations. It doesn't seem like it, but you never know. So I think that there's a situation there where the you know, if I were a fan, I don't know if I've said this on here or not. If I were a fan, I would be a little bit bothered by the way Jeff Traylor talks about all this stuff, just because at a certain point there was a level of taking pride in doing more with less, and now it seems like we're not that interested in doing more with less. We're trying to do more with more. So I think if they sort of don't lose faith in the stuff that made them good in Conference USA, if they're
yeah,
able to still focus on finding good high school players who are overlooked, even if you're not going to keep them 4 years, you can get a couple good seasons out of them and
yeah,
developing the guys you have so that they're good enough to get poached. If you have 22 starters who are good enough to get poached, you probably had a pretty good season. And then you just
yeah,
have to do it again. But I think like just constantly mourning what you don't have versus making the most of what you do have. And I know he's tried his best to be tasteful about it and expressing that if you want to succeed, it certainly helps to have these resources. But I think that they are in range of being the team that they want to be with what they have now if they leverage it all correctly, if that makes
yeah,
sense. And certainly having more will help. And eventually you're not going to be able to pay guys who develop into stars, but you can put a good team out there the way things are structured now. And if everybody takes a little bit of a step back, or if this is kind of an outlier year where
yeah,
this league clearly so much better than what a normal G5 league would look like, then that could be good enough. So I think that and I know that sounded pessimistic, but I think it's
yeah,
almost like there's room for optimism that UTSA can succeed with the way they do things.
yeah. And I do think it's more with a little less or a little more.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. You don't have to make this huge leap over
Well, they
over
just have
one
to, I
off
mean,
season.
I don't even know if they're on track to get to the 10 million in 3 years mark that the commissioner put out there. So in a certain sense, what Jeff is saying is mandatory. They're
Yeah,
they're going to have to step up a little bit because it doesn't seem like, and there's a lot of stuff that counts in that where there's some scholarships for other sports and things like that, that maybe they're a little bit closer to being on pace for that than you would think. But from kind of what the scuttlebutt is about what they spent on this roster, it does not seem like they're on pace to spend 10 million in 3 years. So they have to come up with it somewhere or other. So
yeah,
I think that there is a level of that just being like a factual statement when he's
right.
asking for more, that they're like will not continue to be in the league if they don't do more kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I get that part of it, but I also think that there's just room for kind of maximizing what you do have.
Yep. I get you. I'm with you 100%. Greg, I think that's going to wrap us up this week. The Roadrunners closed their 2025 regular season against Army at the Alamo Dome, 2:30 p.m. kickoff. We'll both be there. I guess we'll do another one of these next week. See what happens. I think just wait for the bowl. Wait for conference championships. Who's your AAC? Excuse me, American Conference champion this
Hey, there
year,
you go.
Greg?
Yeah, you don't want Sword the Eagle to get mad at you.
Yes.
I guess it looks like North Texas is on track
Yeah.
for that. The
Yeah.
standings are so weird. I haven't looked at all the scenarios just because
Yeah.
UTSA is
Quite a
not
bit.
involved
Yeah.
in this.
Quite a bit of scenarios out there.
You look at like some of I love the S&P Plus. North
Yeah.
Texas is like it's like they're like 19th or something. Like they're like a really good team on paper. And so
Yeah.
I'm just interested to see how that translates to if they actually get that playoff opportunity and if they get a chance to compete for the conference championship. Because like South Florida is technically the most talented roster,
Yep.
and they're the one that beat North Texas.
Right.
But that game kind of got away from them in that little middle eight stretch there, and
Yeah.
maybe they aren't that far off. So I don't know. I think that would be interesting if that was something that they had the opportunity to be on that playoff stage. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on a UTSA
I was
on a
gonna.
UTSA podcast.
My next question was gonna ask, and I know you keep tabs of this because you're on a poll with a group of other writers. Who's your G5 playoff
Right now, I
guy?
have North Texas, but I just think if they all keep beating each other up, James Madison's not that far off. So
Yeah.
I don't know. They actually just sent out the update a little bit ago. I don't know who we all have. I think I would bet they have James Madison collectively just because it's easy. But
Right.
I think it's probably more accurate to say that the best American team is the team that deserves the spot.
Yep. Quite the season in the American it's been, Greg. So. All right, that'll wrap it up. We'll see you guys after the Army game. JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports, Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. Thanks everybody for watching.